What's up, everyone? True Techno Gamer here, back at you again for part 2 of my ray tracing video series. Not really a full series, but I wanted to do at least a part 2 to take some more time to show some more specific examples of what ray tracing looks like in certain games today. Like I said, ray tracing is out there in well over 100 games. I'm not going to obviously go through all of them. Some of the ones that was easy to find examples of, and I'm not doing anything magical here, just looking at public information, browsing YouTube and other stuff. I'm going to set it up where, essentially we can look at it together. You kind of look over my shoulder. I'm going to kind of walk through some of these examples, show some video footage, side by sides, ray tracing on versus off. And I'll kind of do some commentary, talk about, what we're looking at, what some of the differences are, highlight them to you guys. And at the end of it, I'll give my overall take and my overall impressions. But again, I want you to look at these games and then let me know, are you using them, for yourself when you play, if you have these games and you're playing them? 2, if you haven't played them, or, if you're not someone who's interested into this stuff at all, in terms of at least playing them, do you see the difference, right? Is it really noticeable to you? And then the ultimate question, is it really worth it? That's the kind of question I'm asking you guys. I just want to know. There will be differences. I'll point them out. And I'm going to kind of organize it where I'm going to start with games that have less of an impact with ray tracing, right? Where ray tracing doesn't make as much of a difference. And as we kind of go along, I'm going to kind of build it up and show more examples, better examples of games that have a bigger, just image quality impact, and then accumulating with some of the full-on path tracing examples that I alluded to in part 1 of the video. So think about that as you look through it. But without further ado, sit back, look at these examples with me, and again, start typing. Let me know what you think. All right, welcome back. So let's get into this. Let's start. Let's go back in time. Let's start a little bit chronologically here. And this is the Ray Trace Revolution channel, and we're going to look at Battlefield 5. So Battlefield 5 was, I think, literally the first commercially available game that featured ray tracing, real-time ray tracing, from DirectX 12. It was shortly after NVIDIA unveiled their 2000 series graphics cards back in 2018, and Battlefield 5 was one of the first games to come out, and they released it. So let's look at what it looks like. Okay, so we're seeing ray trace reflections. So clearly, let's stop there. So ray trace reflections, when you look down now, you clearly can see that the actual modeling of the street there, the light over here, and even the detail through the windows is fairly accurate, and a lot more accurate than what it looked like over here, right? So ray tracing off, you see there's an approximation of the street here, right? But it's some darkness there, and it doesn't look very accurate. The lamp here, looks like, again, an approximation of the lamp, but not very accurate. And again, what's going on here with this window, right? It looks pretty different. So when we see what it looks like with ray tracing on, again, looks a lot more realistic. You're really looking at like the city through the window and through the door, pretty clear right through the ground there. So I think this is a pretty obvious example. Water reflections, again, is another common use of it. There it is. You clearly can see there is a difference, right? But I mean, again, is it really dramatic? What's going on here is that, water obviously doesn't show a mirror-like reflection because the water has waves that are moving. It has refraction and other physical properties. So you're not going to see a clear image. So you see this kind of wavy, distorted look of the trees there, for example. But it does look a lot more accurate, and it looks a little bit more realistic overall, right? So here's a little bit more of a subtle case, right? You see a lot more of that yellow building, right, through the ice there on the road. That's kind of the biggest difference, I think, there. Another clear example, these windows, Ironically, when you first glance at this, it doesn't necessarily look like windows. Like the glass, this is glass, right? That is covering this train station here. So here's an example of ray tracing actually making a pretty meaningful impact. It doesn't look like glass right now, but when you see the ray tracing mode flip on, it does transform it. Now you could barely see the train, which is more realistic because you see the building across the street reflected a lot more realistically, and even the sky area here. And it's harder to see because you're looking at some light get reflected, some light go through this glass. So you can see a little bit of the train here, but it's kind of hard because you're really seeing a lot more of the world reflected. That's a completely different look, right? Again, another example, cool reflections, extra shiny walls to highlight it. One thing I want to point out there though as well is notice that, let me see if I can show it here. Oops, let's go back there. So notice that ray tracing off, when you look at the stairs there, the stairs kind of has this like darkness here, right? You don't see much more detail. But when ray tracing is on, notice that the stair color is completely changed as well. So ray tracing again is modeling the physical properties of these materials a lot more realistically and true to life. The reality is, the way that this is modeled, there's a light source here, there's light up here, and that light is getting reflected off of the surface, sure. But as it's getting reflected, it's also, calculating an additional bounce, and you're getting some of that yellow color from the wall now showing up in these stairs. That's essentially what's happening. Without ray tracing and now literally tracing these rays and bouncing them off of these surfaces, you can't really model that, at least not nowhere near easily or accurately. So look at that again. The stairs completely transformed. Not just the materials on the wall, but the color. And now you see this yellow hue, which almost is reminiscent of kind of what a global illumination or indirect lighting looked like. But even with reflections, with accurate ray tracing, you can kind of simulate a lot of that impact there. So that's another good example of ray tracing here. Another obvious example, so, look at the floor here, the puddle, and then look at the glass here. This glass, again, this is what I was talking about, these crude approximations with reflections without ray tracing is, there's nothing there. It's kind of just black, right? You can barely tell that it's glass. You look down at the puddle here, you do see something that somewhat resembles this lamp here, I guess, with some clouds above it. And then some structure here. You can't really make anything out. But when the ray tracing is flipped on, everything becomes clear, very clear. So now you actually see a full-on representation of this building across the street, pretty detailed as well. And things look a little bit clearer down here as well. So there you go. Now I'm not going to go through all of, and there's like a 5-minute video here for Battlefield 5, but that gives you an idea of what it looked like in Battlefield. Now, as we're looking at this, I want you to ask yourself the question: if you're playing Battlefield 5, it's the first-person shooter. You're in the middle of this World War II in this case, right? You're going through your character. You're trying to look for, enemies and avoid enemies. Would you really notice this without this A and B comparison? I want you to keep this question in mind as you look through these examples. All right? If I wasn't stopping this video or you didn't have an actual side-by-side comparison, would you really be looking at, some of these examples and saying to yourself, even with the ray tracing off, wow, this really looks poor without this reflection here, or this really somehow negatively impacts, my gaming experience with, with this game, because I don't see the building reflected accurately across the street. It's one of those things that, honestly, a lot of people haven't even noticed. I've pointed out certain games that I've been playing with my family and friends, and I'm like, oh, well, look what ray tracing is doing. Look what this is, game is doing now. And they're like, well, I see it now. But before that, they never noticed it, right? So to keep that in mind and actually have that question. And let's move on to the next game. Okay, so for the next game, I'm going to look at Shadows of the Tomb Raider, which again was one of the first. I don't remember which order, but it was circa 2018, 2019. It was one of the first ray trace supported games. I wanted to point this one out for two reasons. This video that I found here, this is not the Ray Trace Revolution channel, but the video I found here shows the FPS counter. You can clearly see the snapshot. So when I talk about a huge FPS hit, this is a good example of it. But the ray trace effect in question here is only ray trace shadows, and this is definitely of the more subtle variety. Let's look and see if we can really see the difference. And when you see the difference, if you see the difference, how big of a difference is it? And think about, is it worth it when you see that your frame rate is almost cut in half, as you see here. So let's look at Shadows of the Tomb Raider. Again, not the best example, but there's a lot of examples like this, right? Huge performance hits. Now you look at them side by side immediately, and I've talked about the promise of ray tracing. Do you see a difference? The first time we can see what ray trace shadows do here is by looking at the shadows of the characters on the bottom here. Hopefully you see my cursor I'm trying to highlight, but look at this area here and look at it here. So I talked about how ray tracing shows more diffuse and more soft shadows, and that's what you see here. Notice that the shadow looks really, the edges look really sharp here. The shadow is really dark. The light source is up here, and in truth, you wouldn't see as sharp of an edge, right, in reality. So this is more accurately modeled. And think to yourself, really? So these are NPC characters in the background here. They're dancing around, standing around, and you're looking at the scene and you're looking at the shadows and saying to yourself, yeah, they look too sharp here. That doesn't look realistic. Let me add that on for a roughly, 40 to 50% cut in my FPS, right? That's what's happening here, right? Let's keep going. Look at some more examples. But yeah, you can see it. It looks softer, more diffuse on the bottom here across the board, right? That's ray trace shadows. And remember, I put ray trace shadows as kind of like the most subtle ray tracing effect that we're seeing today with the hybrid approach. So this is a prime example of that. Okay, so here's where things get more interesting, okay? Now we're outside, and this is the beginning of the game. So you immediately can see that the colors are different, right? The right side, you see a lot more of the sunlight and that kind of nice warm hue in the sand. It's not, yeah, it looks different now. Now watch when they turn. Look at the scene here. And we're going to see this in more detail here. But this is where things get interesting. So here's the beach scene again. Really no difference from quality and performance, but just for the sake of this video. Different. Much more of a nice warm hue there. I would say that looks more realistic. I would say that looks more pleasing to the eye for sure. Again, you're going to take a performance hit once again, Now here's where you probably would notice the biggest difference. Quality. Notice how, there's no real contrast on the rocks. They're pretty dark. Now look at this. Just kind of transformed the scene, right? Now the rocks are bright and you can see shadow. Notice the occluded shadows here where the sunlight can't get to. That's modeled a lot more realistically. So this is neat. That's neat, right? All right, so here's Far Cry 6. Another AMD sponsored title, optimized title. This one just has ray trace reflections. But this is interesting because now we're starting to get to the point where we start to see the difference in how ray tracing is handled for different levels of hardware. Ray tracing reflection was only implemented on the PC. They did not include this on the console version. So if you play Far Cry on PS5 and Xbox Series, you don't have ray trace reflections. They deemed it too expensive. The game runs really well on the consoles for what it is now. I guess ray trace reflections would have taken too much of an additional hit. That said, on the PC, we can see that ray trace reflection does make a meaningful difference. You can clearly see, again, the character is reflected there, the whole world is reflected there. That's a huge difference, right? Just the materials of that object there. Here's ray tracing on again. You see how the fire is reflected in the little water puddle down there. Here's a little TV. Again, now you actually can see the full reflection of the people standing there and the main character. This car model, when you look up close, you see your character reflected in there. That's the power of ray trace reflections. And this one also has ray trace shadow, sorry. So you see the difference. The shadow looks pretty weird, very jagged, You saw that look pretty ugly. With ray tracing on, it's a lot cleaner, a lot sharper, a lot more stable. Now here we have another recent stud of a game, the Calypso Protocol, which I actually recently finished. It's an awesome game if you want to try it. Let's look at it, this scene here. Ray tracing off, ray tracing on. Did you catch it? Look at the area down here on the floor. You should see some ray trace reflection work going on there. Ray tracing off. Again, there is some approximation of this, machine in here. It's a little bit blurrier though. Ray tracing on. Not a great difference, right? It's not nearly as obvious as we've seen in the past. But again, this is really, really crude, low resolution, low ray count ray tracing. Should be a perfect example of ray trace shadows. You see a big shadow of the main character here. Ray tracing off. Also note the performance here, guys. Again, right? ROI, limited ray tracing integration, but look at the performance here. So we're at 106 FPS with ray tracing off, ray tracing on. 58 FPS. Again, like a 40-something% drop. Almost 50% drop, right? But once again, actually, no, it is about 50% drop, right? But look at what happened, right? So this is more accurate. This is a more soft diffuse shadow. His shadow should not be perfectly pin sharp. That's not how things work in the real world. I said that. But ask yourself again, does this look better to you? Does it look more pleasing to your eye? Because I've heard people say that they prefer the non-ray trace look for shadows. And in some cases, I agree with them. This may be one of those cases because that looks kind of, it just looks like the shadow is incomplete, right? In a way. But that is how it would look more true to life. Once again, 106 FPS is really, really sharp shadow. Looks like a monster almost. Here, much, much more diffuse. 57 FPS. It literally is 50%, guys, of FPS drop. Better, worth 50% cost, you tell me. Here's an example of ray trace reflection. So again, like I said earlier, ray trace reflections, when you look at a reflective object, the one thing that's usually missing in a video game is the character themselves, which is, harder and more expensive to actually, render. So here we can see the character is actually reflected now in this kind of glass. That's about all you see though. It's not really much difference beyond that because it would be a little bit more detailed like we saw in Battlefield earlier if they had higher ray counts. All right, now it's time for one of the big ones, Marvel Spider-Man. Now this was done as a remaster initially for the PS5. It included reflections, and this is a pretty big one because this is a open world game in the middle of Manhattan, tons of skyscrapers with lots and lots of windows and reflective surfaces all around. And you have Spider-Man swinging all around. It seemed like a prime candidate for RT reflections to be able to show the city in more detail. And that's exactly what we got with the PS5. And not only did we get it, but we got it with awesome performance, even with a 60 frame per second mode with RT reflections on throughout the entire city. And it looked pretty convincing. The PC version came out recently in 2022 and, kind of took it to another level in terms of just the resolution of reflections, how much of the environment was reflected in the scene, etc., etc. But let's look at what this looks like and how RT reflections can really make a difference. Night and day difference. There we go. Clearly, look at the view on this side over here. Just nothing. You can't make out anything there. On this side, there is at least some approximate view of what you're looking at, right? So when you're, playing the game, you kind of, okay, there's some reflection here. You at least your brain understands that this is in fact a glass surface or a reflective surface. You don't really have time to look at the detail in there, and if you did, you would notice it's lacking. This doesn't even give you that. It gives you a little bit, and there's some reflection here. But of course, RT reflections, now you actually can see the city. You can see people moving dynamically in it. Again, ray tracing off, ray tracing on, night and day difference. Approximation, accurate. Here again, look here again. Like, I don't know what that is. It's supposed to be trying to model. But RT reflection, yeah. Spider-Man was missing again. And you can see the taxis and the traffic, actually moving in the building. That's pretty cool, right? You see the traffic moving in the building. He walks around the ground. Again, ray tracing on, off. You don't see him. What were you looking at, dude? Like, let's go back for a second. Do you see that? So ray tracing off, you see the pedestrians. You see them kind of following him. You see him, moving. But with ray tracing off, what are you looking at? Like, there is no representation whatsoever of the people there or the actual street that is literally there and what's across the street. There's like a tree. Like, what is the tree doing there? What is this? Hello? Like, okay, this is the kind of stuff. It's funny, right? It's how bad it looks. But how many people really went on foot playing the Spider-Man and just walked around in front of these buildings and just said, wow, why is there a tree there? This looks really inaccurate. Most people didn't notice this, but it's there. It looks pretty bad. And with RT reflections, it's obviously a lot more realistic and a lot more accurate. Although it does look a lot more low res, though. This is a great example. Please show that again. Hold on, guys. So this is what Insomniac did. They have like a static, kind of picture, almost like a texture of the city. And if you don't know better, to your layman's, brain and mind, you're playing the game and it's like, okay, this is supposed to be a reflective surface. I'm seeing something through here. In your mind, the city is there. You're up on a building, so you're like, oh yeah, okay, I'm looking at the city. But it's just like this static texture that has absolutely no bearing in reality whatsoever. It's hilarious. Because look at the RT version and what is really there. You don't see any city like that. You're on a rooftop. All you see is one, like 2 buildings, right? 3 buildings. You don't see a whole city view. That's hilarious. You don't even see this object. You don't see Spider-Man at all in there. So yeah, it's obviously, I would say, more pleasing while being, way more accurate, right? And then yeah, some of the interior areas here. This is cool too to see. Like this reflective floor here looks completely different. You can see the characters reflecting through the floor, a lot more realistic there. You can see up to the ceiling, screen space reflections again. See how it disappears. I'm glad how they're highlighting it there. So again, you would have seen some reflection even without RT, but RT was much better. And then yeah, again, the buildings here, like what is that street? It's crazy. It's funny. Yeah, you're swinging around. You see the city accurately represented through the buildings. It's pretty cool, man. This was an awesome update. And with ray tracing off, you see again, you're looking at some weird, like what is that tree doing there in the middle of the street? What is this? There's no people, no pedestrians, no cars, or nothing. Just a really, really crude. Now, mind you, this was a PlayStation 4 game, right? Originally, no RT, no, nothing like that. And you can't use screen space reflection either because they would be too jarring to use on the buildings. So you couldn't, like, as your camera's moving around constantly with Spider-Man swinging at high speeds, you would just see stuff kind of going in and out of the building's surface all the time. So the compromise was to have these kind of static images on the buildings to give you some sense that something is, you're looking at something there, but it's not accurate at all. And wow, huge difference. So we're getting into the moderate ray trace difference. Look at the car. Right? I mean, that's pretty cool to see that, right? Much, much, much better. All right, let's jump to the next one. This is Hitman 3, RT reflections and sun shadows. And again, this is of the moderate. There's some scenes here where it makes a huge difference. So let's check that out real quick. Obviously right here, reflections. You see the character, you see the world. Look at that. Ray tracing off. I don't know what that is. It's supposed to be a really, really, really rough approximation, I guess. So that's a pretty big difference. Ray tracing on here. Again, the glass surfaces. You see the reflections on the side of all of these glass surfaces here. Yeah, that's a pretty complex object to do to get reflections right on. And you can literally like, zoom in and you can see the party and the representation of the people there. It's pretty awesome. Yep. Water reflection is looking pretty awesome there. Yeah, laundromat. Look at that. This is actually pretty cool and unique scene. So laundromat has a bunch of these circular reflective surfaces, right? And you can see like replicated versions of the scene through all of these different. Look at that. It's pretty cool. It's a really unique scene. Again, you see an approximation of view, but you don't see the characters because they're dynamic. Same deal. Much different. Look at that. Night and day difference there. And the detail that you see in the reflections. This is another case, by the way, of a game that only has ray tracing on PC. Too expensive for consoles. So consoles users miss out completely. Yeah, it's raining. It's a much more diffuse reflection, but you still see a lot more reflective stuff going on. But again, Hitman, you could tell they definitely built these scenes with ray tracing in mind. Lots of wetness, lots of rain, lots of reflective surfaces here. So, very big difference. Look at the doors there. Just even something like that, you don't even notice how much is missing typically. Here's the shadows. So once again, better, worse. Shadows are tricky to me, right? I mean, it's different. You know, is it better, worse? It's subtle. Here's another example of the shadow of the trees. You can say it looks a little bit more, I mean, again, more diffuse there. Shadows on here, again, you see how it looks a little bit more blurry, more diffuse around the edges here, not as sharp. We talked about that. I don't know. I'm still waiting to hear from you guys. Now, let's get to another big one. We're getting to some of the bigger examples here. This is Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition. This is one that also was available for the consoles. And it uses ray trace global illumination primarily. It uses a lot. It uses shadows. It uses reflection on the PC, but the reflections are turned off on the console. But the big one is the global illumination, which transforms the look of certain scenes based on the color and how light is propagated through the scene. So let's take a look at that. This was a big deal when it came out. The other thing here, for example, real quick, is that this is one of the first games to actually require you having a ray tracing graphics card to run it. The lighting in this game is completely ray traced. This is the future, right? Where games are going to be completely designed and built around ray tracing. This is one of the first games to do that. So it's a pretty milestone game. But let's see what the effect looks like. Single bounce, infinite bounce. So they're showing how deep you can go down a rabbit hole, so to speak. Single bounce. Now, what they're showing with the single bounce GI here is that there was a ray trace mode for the original game, and that mode used a single bounce for the GI. So that's what they're showing there. Let's go back there for a second, and you can see what that looks like. The infinite bounce GI is what they added when they went all in, and for this enhanced edition where they basically redid the lighting model. So that's off. On, you see some orange. Here it's completely different, and it almost looks jarring. Right? It's like, whoa, why is the whole scene orange now, right? Look at it again. Single bounce. I like this comparison. So this is what the original ray trace looked like. And now with infinite bounce, where that light just keeps propagating, completely transforms the scene. Yeah, look how bright, how much light is bleeding there. Ray tracing off. Right? Single bounce. Again, this is a cavern, so it should be dark. But now with infinite bounce, you can get and propagate that light a bit more. It's obviously not going to be as bright as it is outside, but that's more accurate. That's more true to life. The off, you can see the rocks, but you don't see the color from the light on the outside. Yeah, there's another good scene. So there's fire here. Look at how the fire is the color of the fire is propagating on the objects around it in such a realistic way. Single bounce, pretty dark. But infinite bounce, though, you can fill in those details now. Single bounce. Yes, sir. Infinite bounce. Yeah, you can see it, right? It's a lot more detailed. All the nooks and crannies are filled with accurate light and accurate shadows. Everything looks a lot more natural. This is the future. Look at that. So there's a lot here, but just wanted to give you guys an idea of, you know, how powerful ray tracing can be when you kind of go all in. It's the final scene I'll show. It's pretty dark and hard to make out a lot of details. Look at how different it looks with the infinite bounce though. Look at that. You can see now like subtle, how the subtle light is going on in the environment here, but look at the shadows and how what it looks like around the window there. There's no shadow representation here with ray tracing off. Okay, everything just kind of looks dark and kind of muddy. Even with a single bounce GI, you don't see any shadow. There's very little light bleed coming into the scene. But when you go all in, it transforms the look of the scene. It's amazing. Next game on the list is Dying Light 2, and this is a pretty good one. As you see, it has a number of RT effects. It pretty much has all of the major ones that I mentioned, all 4 of them. So let's see what that looks like. There's some scenes here that is definitely transformed with RT. So you see there's a lot more richness to the trees, the leaves, the color, you know, the coloring is much better. The material work is much better. Yeah, this is completely different, right? The lighting and the colors, the way that this area here, sorry, let me go back, is darker as it should be because it's secluded. Light is not really able to get in there. So how light is kind of seeping in areas and being propagated is completely different. Let's look at that again. So notice that the colors of the bricks here is completely different. It's showing kind of a lighter hue as if it's kind of, you know, matching more of the sunlight. This area interior here is lit, which it really shouldn't be, right? Like I mentioned. And notice how the trunk here of this tree kind of looks a little off. It looks like it's I don't know, right? Pretty video gamey. It doesn't look very grounded and rooted there. RT changes everything. So notice that the look of that trunk tree is completely different. Like I said, the color scheme here, only on the sides where the sun is actually over here in this direction. So on that side, the lighting makes sense, right? That it would be get some of that light. But yeah, very different scene. This is the global illumination and the ambient occlusion at work. This is another scene that's looks completely different when you really take it in. So yeah, things look a lot flatter. Just look at this area here and how light is propagated in this side here. Look at the area underneath here that should be occluded. It should be darker under here and inside of this bus. And you'll see that that's there. You see now there's an area of darkness there. There's a lot more darkness here. It just looks a lot more natural and a lot more darkness there as well. Reflections, once again, it look like without RT, there's like no approximation really. It just looks like a muddy thing. With RT, you can now see at least your character. Again, those mirrors, they kind of look like dirty or, you know, they're more opaque, but you at least can see your character and a little bit more of the environment. Okay. Remember what I was saying earlier about how ray trace ambient occlusion works well with foliage. Dying Light 2 is a great example of that. Notice how the foliage looks different. You know, I would argue that it looks a lot more grounded and rooted in the world. And the shading just looks more realistic, right? Look at that. Okay. It makes the foliage look a lot better. A lot of that is due to the ambient occlusion. Look at how the area underneath the brown leaves here are shaded. Notice that dark area underneath them now. It's a lot darker, a lot more realistic. Even some of the shading within the leaves, you know, kind of looks better. Completely different scene. Power of global illumination, right? This is an area that is mostly occluded. Most of the light should be occluded, but it has gaps. Right? And this is actually really interesting use case. There's gaps here, so some light should be going through. And it is, and there's obviously areas on top here, but there should be a lot more light occluded. It should not be this bright. and it looks completely different with RT. Look at that. It changes the whole mood. It changes the whole vibe of the environment here. Powerful example of global illumination in particular at work. So now we're getting into some of the real good stuff. Cyberpunk 2077 was, upon its release, considered to be the absolute pinnacle of ray tracing, this hybrid ray tracing that we see. CD Projekt Red went all in, working closely with NVIDIA to add pretty much every ray tracing effect known and really push the hardware. This was the game to justify you having at the time a 3090 card, for example. And even a 3090 couldn't really run all of the ray tracing effects anywhere near 60 FPS, even with DLSS and active. So let's see what this looks like. Now we're getting into some of the cases where it's a way more noticeable. I mean, again, this is completely different look. Reflections galore, the overall lighting and shading, the colors of the materials have changed due to, again, indirect lighting, bounce lighting, global illumination. This is the power of ray tracing. Here we're going to see it again. Reflections galore with the water there makes that scene look completely different. It makes it look a lot more natural, a lot more realistic. See some daytime examples. Now what you're seeing there, again, look at the area underneath the car and to the right here. That is mostly RTAO, right? Ambient occlusion. So it looks a lot more natural without ray tracing. The car doesn't really look very grounded into this world. It doesn't look like it's planted onto this ground surface here, into this wall. It kind of looks like, when you look at it, like the car is actually clipping the wall. It's going through the wall, right? But when you add that ambient occlusion, now it looks a lot more grounded. The shading over here, you can say, oh, the car is sitting on this surface, and this area here should not be lit, and it's not really, very minimally. And now it doesn't look like it's clipping through the wall anymore. Gonna see pretty minor inside. There's some reflection work there. You see the different shading. Look at the area here. Very different shading there. Emissive lights is another big thing that's rare. So emissive light is the idea of having like a surface that is just emitting light consistently. And what happens is, without ray tracing, it's hard to get the bounce lighting from that emissive light, so you don't see the impact that it really should have on the world. If you look at this scene here, this huge neon light here and this light here, I mean, you see a little purple over here, but what's going on with this light isn't really propagated too well, right, in the world. But now we see a lot more of the light and the effect of this big light here onto the world. Just look at this area down here. It's a lot darker without ray tracing. With ray tracing, look at the difference there, right? You clearly see the actual color and changing of the dynamic lighting from this emissive surface here on the surface here. It's a complete difference. You see the hue change is awesome, actually. Again, diffuse reflections going on here. Even with the glasses, you can see the difference in the reflections there. Yeah, we get some yellow bounce light now from the global illumination, which is, again, much more realistic. You see some reflections on the surface there too. Again, screen space reflection they're showing. You look down, you lose all of that reflection. With ray trace reflections, you don't lose it at all. It's a lot more persistent. Makes the world feel a lot more grounded. It's an awesome example as well. Again, ray trace reflections. Now, again, Cyberpunk, being the showpiece title that it is for ray tracing, takes a significant hit and a significant amount of power. You really need something even higher than a 3090 or even 3090 Ti to really run it. You pretty much need, if you want to max out Cyberpunk with ray tracing, you pretty much need a 4080 or 4090. We're talking on the order of like an 80% hit to performance when you enable like all of the ray tracing features. And they're actually working on a further update to even make the ray tracing even more heavy with an upcoming update. So yeah, you can see the ray tracing there in the glass. So Cyberpunk has a little bit of everything in here going on, right? Emissive lights, reflections, illumination, AO, and shadows. We've seen it all. You can see the shadow work over here on this foliage over here without ray tracing. If you can go back a little bit. Yeah, notice that the shadows look a lot less convincing from the foliage over here. It's a minor detail, of course, but it's there. So when it's on, right, everything just looks a lot fuller. Another CD Projekt Red game that was recently updated with a next-gen patch called The Witcher 3 Next Gen. And it's pretty clear here. There's 4, they pretty much have all 4 RT effects, the main ones that I highlighted in the beginning of this video. 2 of which are only on PC, the reflections and shadows. So they do have global illumination on the console as well as the ambient occlusion. And this makes a pretty significant difference in this game. Witcher 3 is now a 7-year-old game. And with the RT patch, it makes a lot of things look new again. So it's awesome. Let's see what that looks like. Again, completely different, right? Shading is different. Colors are different on the materials here. You got more reflection coming from the ground here. Let's look at the side by side. It's just a whole different vibe. Now this makes sense because the sunlight coming in here has this warm light. And what we're seeing is that sunlight is actually being propagated through here and warming up this environment a lot better. Whereas before, without that, this environment has a whole different tone. It's literally cold, right? It's more of a blue hue. There's some pretty like direct light from the sun here, but it's no real indirect lighting going on. Now with the indirect lighting, it's just way better. Leagues better. Again, you see the difference in color there. Different shading. That's the AO. Look at the area underneath here as they're pointing out, and underneath the steps here, it's darker, much more natural looking. See the difference in shadows as well. Yep. So this just looks a lot less natural and realistic when you really look at it, right? Again, you're playing the game. You guys have played Witcher for the last 7 years. It didn't have ray tracing. You probably didn't notice, right? Or didn't care. But, now that it's there, and again, you see the side by sides, this is a, area here where this should have some shading going on, right? Because this is occluding a good portion of the sunlight. And we don't see that at all. Look at the difference there. This whole area now looks shaded. It just changes the entire mood of this scene. And the color scheme, again, now is much warmer. Yep, this is the AO in effect, like again with the foliage. You get a lot more shading and makes it look a lot more grounded, right? And a lot more realistic. There, it just kind of looks flat, looks more gamey, doesn't really look very natural. And then, yeah, you would see some shading, right? On itself, yeah. The arches, get the indirect lighting here. It's awesome. Again, it changes the entire mood and color. It's a lot warmer look there. Pretty awesome. So RT reflections, the impact it makes on all the water. Without it, there's again a crude approximation. Yep, game looks great. Again, different vibe. Whole nother level of shading on the tree here, on the stairs over here from the ambient occlusion, as well as the GI working in tandem, the global illumination, sorry. Makes a huge difference. Bluish color on the side there, warmer light, absolutely. Without it, there's none of that, right? You don't see any of that level of just detail and sophistication with the lighting. Again, a whole different vibe on the materials of all these barrels here. They have a whole different color. The shading, look at the shading in the areas here that's in this, this structure. Again, most of the light should be occluded. So that shading in darker area is now much more realistically captured. Awesome, awesome example. Again, we got the reflections on the water here as well. Fortnite was recently updated to add UE5, Unreal Engine 5 support. That in and of itself means it now has ray tracing. Now, I should say that Fortnite did have ray tracing before, but now it has the much more sophisticated ray tracing that comes with UE5. And boy, what a difference does it make. Like I said earlier, this to me is the first and prime. This came out, end of last year, 2022, November, December, somewhere around there. And this to me is the first and real prime example of what a quote unquote next gen update should be. Take a game like Fortnite, it has cartoony visuals, it had some kind of really basic level of ray tracing previously, but now with UE5, it's really the first Unreal Engine 5 game released. It makes sense because it's coming directly from Epic, and it just shows the power of what is there, even with a game like this. Let's take a look at what it looks like. A simple room like this is transformed with the Lumen RT. Awesome. What we're seeing is the sunlight from the outside without RT has no bounces in here. So you don't see any of the impact of that warm sunlight within the room as it would be. There's a window here and a door that's wide open. With Lumen RT, we now get, even this is the software, by the way, it's just a lower fidelity version of the RT, but it's still, as you can see, transformative. Now we see this entire lighting inside this room change. There's the warm hue from the sun affecting the floors and all of the walls and the ceilings. Everything just looks brighter, more vibrant. The Harbor RT doesn't really look that different. It's a little bit higher precision, a little bit more accurate, but it's really not that noticeable, to be quite honest. And as you can see, as they open the door, you can see the light kind of spill in. Now look at what happens when they go into this like area here. Again, the light from the sun is lighting up this ice. You can see some of the transmissive surfacing on the ice. You don't see that with the ray trace off. Ice is, transmissive with light, right? It's somewhat translucent. You don't see that, right? With the RT enabled, the whole like look of the ice and the areas around it. Now this area is darker as it should be. This area is lighter with some of the translucent lighting on the ice visible there. Awesome. Again, whole different vibe in here. Completely different color scheme. Whole different, look to the materials. Looks so much flatter, right, without RT. This is, hugely, transformative. Yeah, look at the accuracy of the reflections while the character is moving. A lot more natural. Makes some scenes in Fortnite look photorealistic because it makes, the materials have been also redone. That floor texture is there and the way the light propagates, that just looks so natural. I alluded to this earlier, Minecraft. Now, we are now in the land of full-on path tracing. This is the real holy grail. This is like ray tracing on steroids, so to speak. It's even more expensive than ray tracing, which is why we can only see it with very, very simplistic, looking games like Minecraft, or really, really old games like Quake and Portal, as we'll see in a second. But this is the holy grail, where the entire lighting engine is now fully path traced, meaning essentially it's infinite light bounces. The entire path of the light is traced until the light essentially would die from just however much energy it started with. Whereas ray tracing is, can be limited to just 1, 2, or a few bounces, but it's usually terminated before it actually would end. So path tracing just takes it further. And with a game like Minecraft, look at the difference it makes. Yes, this is the same game, same crude, simplistic, graphics, but look at that. We see reflections now on the water. Again, a whole different lighting and material system. And again, another water. Again, more reflections. Look at the lighting differences here. This like a whole different scene, right? A whole different game. Now this is path traced, fully path traced, not just ray traced. Wow. Again, it's just about the lighting, but you appreciate the materials a lot more as well. Look at the shadows there with the ray tracing on. Again, now we see accurate reflections in the water down there. sorry, let's keep going. Here's the other classic game that was redone with path tracing support. This is the original Quake. This is an old game from the late 90s. Again, it's pretty simplistic, crude graphics, but add path tracing on top of that, and you still need a top of the line GPU of today to be able to run it. But again, makes a huge difference and gives you a glimpse of what the future of gaming could look like. Wow. I don't need to call out anything more. We don't need to look at, I don't need to pause anything. The difference is there. The material, the sheen, the reflection down the water, the color, light, the way light is being propagated and shaded. Even on these objects, look at this. The reflections on these individual objects, the way that, look at the shadow, dynamic shadows, completely different. Much more accurate, the angle. Yep. Way light is shining through the ceiling there, see that? Awesome. Watch how this red lighting is propagated through the scene. You see the red light hue through there, on the ground, in water, reflections, refraction, translucency, all of that's captured. So again, you see the orange indirect lighting from over here and over here, obviously under here. And you see how it's propagated. It's obviously brighter there. We see glimpses of it down here, but it's none down here. That's how it should be. Reflections. Look at the material difference too on the area around here. I mean, obviously there's a little bit more work going in to update the assets too. Yep, whole different vibe right there. Yeah, I wanted to show this one where the light fills in the room here. That looks really, really sweet and completely different. So here it is, guys. The accumulation of everything. This is a release that NVIDIA released back in December 2022, so just barely a month ago. So this is as good as it gets. This is the latest and greatest. This is Portal, redone in RTX, but again, it's fully path traced. So it's kind of what Quake and Minecraft was, but this game is obviously newer, a bit more complex than those games. And, you know, again, running on the latest NVIDIA cards, the Ada cards, it runs really well, especially with DLSS enabled. You can get realistic frame rates of 30 plus, 30 to 60 even. Portal redone, what does it look like? Whole new materials going on here. Obviously that area around the glass looks completely different. Even something as simple as, you know, this platform here that you step on, you see reflections in it now, right? I mean, it's kind of crazy actually when you think about it. And they obviously did some more work with the materials. Yeah, the materials in the walls here look completely different. I wish they would actually show us some gameplay because it looks probably even more noticeable when in motion. There we go. So yeah, look at how, not just how the light is moving, but notice how the light is affecting the entirety of the world. The ceiling is lit and it actually is moving. You can see the light, how it is when it gets closer, how the lighting is affecting the ceiling and the areas around it. The walls over here, is affected by this one single light source. Whereas here, everything is kind of dark in much the same way. Even with the light moving, there's no dynamic aspect to it at all. So what we see here is the indirect lighting coming from up here, you know, filling in this tunnel and we see that the yellow hue on the sidewalls here all around, which is not here now really. Again, another dynamic thing. Look at how the lighting is actually propagated and how realistic that looks. You see how the shadows are interacting? With path tracing, you get all of that. You get the ambient occlusion, you get the shadows. It's kind of all part of it. Everything is ray traced essentially. Okay, so there you guys have it. Lots and lots of examples of ray tracing. I kind of laid it all out there, and I tried to show all the different ray tracing features at different levels of success and different levels, I would say, of visual impact, from minimal impact all the way up to full-on path tracing. That pretty much gives you guys a good lay of the land of what ray tracing looks like in games to this point. The highlights. Metro Exodus, like I said, that's a milestone because that's one of the first games that really truly was built, well, updates, I should say, to a game that was requiring ray tracing. You needed to have a RTX GPU, or it only ran on a current gen console, PS5 or Xbox Series. And you saw the impact there. I think that's a clear example of how impactful that can be in developer going all in. Aside from that, the only examples we see of like really requiring ray tracing are, again, the path tracing examples with Minecraft and Quake and Portal. But Metro was a great example. Again, I think you would see how reflections have the most impact. And, when ray tracing isn't there in Spider-Man and Dying Light and a bunch of games you saw, it's like, what did that even look like, right? It was laughable, right? And especially in Spider-Man, in some cases, like, what is that is in the reflective surface? It doesn't look natural at all. Ray tracing enables that to look a lot more realistic. Global illumination having a huge effect. I think you saw that a lot in Cyberpunk and The Witcher and Dying Light 2. Global illumination was really, really keen there. So I'm not saying, and hopefully you guys saw, that ray tracing doesn't make an impact. The question is, and I didn't really show all of this, but I did show you some examples. When you're talking about really sacrificing literally 50% or more of your performance, 50% to 80, 90% in the worst cases of your performance, then the question comes up, is it really worth it? And there are some cases that I think you guys saw where I think you can argue it probably isn't. If you can have a game run at 60 frames or 120 frames, nice and smooth, and still look pretty good. Notice that in some cases when ray tracing was off, the fallback solution didn't look bad, right? In some cases you can say they look pretty, But again, if you didn't know better and you're not looking at side-by-side A and Bs, screen space reflection still looks great for the most part, right? There's obviously corner cases where the camera angle, you're not going to get the full effect of it, right? As you saw, and I think I illustrated that. But that's corner cases. For the most part, it's going to look fine, right? GI can be approximated, right, and could be baked, in a non-dynamic way. It wouldn't look like Fortnite when you open the door and you see the light flood in. That was awesome. But you can mimic the look of what that lighting looked like in that room. But artists have to do a lot more work and do it by hand, so to speak. Ray tracing, allows the game engine to basically do that and calculate that on the fly. So essentially, that means it's less work for the artist to have to basically bake in the lighting and do all the lighting work within the scene. That was one of the advantages of what happened with Metro, is that now the artists were able to rely on the engine to do all the lighting in a realistic way automatically. It's awesome. It saves from resourcing, time, personnel, and money, right? to build the game and make it look great. Cyberpunk is, again, a big example of that. So, my general feedback is there are some great examples of ray tracing. There are. And even on the console, which, we saw how Spider-Man looked on the console. Metro Exodus looks by and large like that, besides the reflections on the console. So even on the console, there's some still great examples of ray tracing. But in most cases, you got to ask yourself, is it really worth that performance hit? And especially on console, it usually isn't. It usually isn't. So my question to you is, what do you guys think? looking at these examples, please write in the comments. Is it worth it? Are there certain games that's worth it and not? Which ray tracing feature to you is most worth it and most meaningful to you? GI, reflections, shadows, right, ambient occlusion, etc. When is ray tracing a selling point for you? When you see ray tracing in a game or hear a game has ray tracing, is that like immediately like, oh, yep, I want it? I'm guessing if you already have like a newer GPU, like a 4080, 4090, 7900 maybe from AMD, you're probably going to say yes because you're going to want, games that are going to be able to take advantage and tax your hardware. But, in general, is it a selling point? Do you really care? Is ray tracing something that you just turn on and then like, okay, that looks okay, and then you turn it off? Do you ever use ray tracing on console, on PS5 or Xbox Series? Is that something that's attractive to you? I really want to know. Eventually, we will get to a place where the hardware will be fast enough to do full-on dedicated, like Metro Exodus style and Quake style, full-on dedicated, ray tracing and/or path tracing eventually. Game built from the ground up to take advantage of it, and we get the best of the best. We get the best of what looks like the Witcher 3 and Dying Light in Cyberpunk cases. And that's still probably like, I think, a generation, probably 2 generations away on the GPU side, and it's probably the next full-on console cycle, PS6 and Xbox, whatever, before the hardware is powerful and fast enough to be able to really push like full-on ray tracing, built from the ground up, full-on lighting, path that's ray traced. We're probably still a generation or 2 away, which translates to like, somewhere in the order of like 5 years. But we are going to see more ray trace games, no doubt, using this hybrid ray trace mode. We're going to see more games adding these realistic reflections and realistic lighting, and that's the thing. It's a great thing. I'm all for it. This is the future, guys. Make no mistake about it. This is the future of graphics in games, and it's kind of amazing to see that we're finally achieving the holy grail in computer graphics in roughly 50 years' time. That's all for now. If you made it through this, God bless you. I love you. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe. And I hope to see you in the comments. Till next time, thanks again. True Technical Gamer, signing off.